It has been an interesting time for the sector, among other sectors, with various reports of various job losses, houses not being built or being built, and organisation possibly going into liquidation. But here to get the truth, we have the man himself, the Minister of Construction, Honourable Chris Penk. Welcome, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
So, Minister, if I could start by asking, how's the response been to your announcements over the past month or so?
Yeah, I've been really pleased with the response, to be honest. There's a lot of good constructive discussion out there whereby people just want a building system that enables them to work quickly, efficiently, and more affordably from a consumer point of view. So these conversations about some of the issues and some of the announcements have been around for long enough that I know that if I'm smart, I'll listen carefully to the people who know exactly what's going on and what needs to be done. And reflect that back in government policy. And on that basis, I've been pleased, but I think not surprised that the ideas seem to have landed well. I will just say that people naturally also want to know that we get the detail right, as well as announcing at the high level the general intent and the direction. And so those are fair questions to answer. And so we're sort of working through the detail of those now as we start to prepare the law that will then give effect to these ideas.
If you do find that there are some criticisms as you continue to go along, are you open to making adjustments?
Yes, of course, but I think it is worth distinguishing between criticisms in terms of detail as opposed to the high level, policy decisions and the direction of travel. But I'd also say, as a further caveat, that you can't please all the people all the time, and so if you were to say that there would be no changes unless there's 100% agreement, then simply one would never make any change at all. So I don't want to sound too glib and suggest simply that one doesn't need to take into account feedback. One does, and in general, my answer to your question is yes, that we would need to make changes in response to overwhelming feedback against. But if it's merely a matter that reasonable minds can disagree on how to get to a point that we all agree is needed, then that's something that policymakers simply have to accept.
So final question on this section before I hand back to Paul. I come from a disability sector background, so what's in this for the disabled people? Are you going to work with Minister Bishop to ensure that there is an increase in disability housing and other sorts of buildings taking advantage of the maybe the granny flats, consenting perhaps where you don't have to have so many consenting rules and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and thanks for asking that, particularly from the perspective that you have and would be more aware than me in terms of what exactly is required from a technical perspective to allow maximum disabled access to our built environment. I would say that I think the rules that make it difficult and slow and uncertain and therefore expensive to build have affected every Kiwi, but probably disproportionately those from vulnerable communities or those for whom access to housing, access in the sense of being able to, obtain secure rentals or ownership, as opposed to disability access. But those two coming together, when actually I think the real losers in the system when we make it so hard is actually some of the people who are in precisely those situations. If we need to expend the energy, the effort, and the expense to make sure that our buildings are accessible and appropriate in terms of fire. I was going to say egress and exit being the same thing, but not entry and exit. Don't want to head towards a fire. Then we've got to make it easy as possible in all other respects, so that we have the ability to guard against difficulties that would otherwise be faced by people who are in particular situations and need to be considered. So I think hopefully the reforms that we are undertaking will make it easier for everyone to secure access to affordable but good quality housing, as well as commercial areas as well, shops, offices, and so on. But I also think that it's a worthwhile activity to undertake a review of the building code in relation to disability access. So that's something that I've committed to doing as
I'll
well.
just add on then to from your answer. Do you think that um, combined with the other ministers that the disability housing builds and the construction has been lacking, and you do need to do more, Minister?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can always challenge ourselves to do more. That said, I would say that you've referenced my colleague Chris Bishop. I know that he's very minded to ensure that we have a greater housing supply pipeline as well. And to be fair, and he would acknowledge that there are government policies from the previous government that he's picking up and running with in relation to housing or land supply and zoning rules and so on. So that's really his area, and then I pick up the ball and run with it from the point of view of the building regulations to actually physically get the structures built. So hopefully between us we're going to make a positive difference in that regard. But we'll listen carefully to people in the sector and understand that if we need to do more or do things differently, then of course we'll listen carefully and make changes as we need.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead, Paul.
So, speaking of the sector, it's one that has been the hardest hit by economic times at the moment. It's had some of the largest shrinkage of any sector that we've seen in the country. That's been fed by a number of things, like the government's cancellation of a bunch of kāinga ora builds, for example. And we've seen a massive drain of talent and skills heading offshore as well. These changes I see have been pitched as a way of trying to help boost the construction industry, get people back into work. It's obviously not going to be a fast thing. How do you keep those people who are like, yeah, this is my livelihood, this is my bread and butter? How do you keep them up to speed with what's happening, keeping them informed, keep them involved in the process, so that there is a bit of hope for them at the end of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be a sense of hope that things are going to get better, and in some cases, in some parts of New Zealand, things are already getting better. But I don't want to, sugarcoat the issue. As you've rightly acknowledged, there have been difficult times, and there are different factors and a range of factors that contribute to that. Probably the main one I would say is the fact that we've had difficult macroeconomic conditions. Some of that's global, some of it's post-COVID, but whatever, the result is the same for the people on the ground who want the work and haven't had enough work to do. And sadly, in some cases, they've got out of the game, or they're now plying their trade in Australia. And so we need to acknowledge that, but also have a sense of hope that actually there are some green shoots of recovery, to use that hoary old chestnut as a phrase. But also we know that if we make it easier for people to build, then they'll be able to get out of that hold. If you're looking at a graph from a boom and bust cycle perspective, it looks like a hole. And actually, if you think about the fact we've had a large drop from the height of the COVID era, huge spend, and it sounds like a good problem to have a huge amount of activity all at once. But of course, it's the uncertainty and it's the fact that we have those deep cycles that makes it so difficult to plan from a workforce perspective. And of course, the problem we've got now, if we're not careful, and this is what I am concerned about, is that when the activity levels pick up, as we expect and hope will be the case towards the end of this year and certainly into 2026, we need to have enough skilled labour that remains in this country and engaged in the trades to be able then to take advantage of those opportunities.
One of the proposals as well that you've put forward is self-certification. And that rings a few alarm bells for people because they remember the leaky house issue from a decade ago now, a couple of decades, a little while ago. What sort of steps are being put in place, like the conversations that you're having, because obviously, as you said, it's high level, but how do you build around the fear that allowing self-certification could lead to those kind of issues cropping up again?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question, and for the historical reasons that you've pointed out in regard to leaky homes, but also I would add, examples of poor building practice that we have in our current system. We need to get away from that. Yes, we don't want to make it worse, but also let's not pretend we've got a perfect system now, either in terms of quality and certainly in terms of affordability and productivity as well. So how we avoid that, I think it depends what kind of self-certification you mean. First of all, there are plumbers and drain layers who will be able to sign off their own work or self-certify in the same way that electricians and gas fitters already do. So it's important we've got the occupational licensing to ensure that there are robust protections for the homeowner, because the person signing off the work, standing behind it, is accountable, being registered, qualified, experienced, and so on. And then you've got self-certification of the work of granny flats, up to 70 square metres. Any age group, of course, but typically we talk about these as relating to an older generation, but doesn't need to be so necessarily. So relatively small, simple structure in terms of the build design, and we're working through that detail now. But if you think about a single story, the wet areas needing to be completed by registered qualified plumbers, electricians, likewise, so too the builders being licensed building practitioners. And then if you think about the fact that the work does still need to be done to the building code. So I think, I wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to make the point that we're not talking about reducing the quality or the standards. It's actually about ensuring that they are met by a different method. And actually, I know it might sound counterintuitive, but in some ways, having the council involved and checking everything from the consent all the way through inspections to the code compliance certificate actually has meant that there's less pressure on the practitioners to do a good job in the first place, because of course they can simply walk away, turn out their pockets, and allow someone else, being the council or the ratepayer, to accept that liability. So I think there's something in there about incentives and liability that actually overall should ensure a better and more productive sector. And I would say as well, the other aspect for that, as applies to that area, but also for building companies that are operating at scale, that we will allow to sign off their own work or have some lesser regime than we currently have, is they need to be able to stand behind that. They need to have what we call adequate means. In other words, the ability to stump up in the event of a failure. Yes, I think there'll be fewer failures in the first place because they'll have their proverbials on the line in a way that they don't currently, but also to say, well, if it's insurance or if it's guarantees or if it's some other way that we can say, hand on heart, we're not going to have vulnerable consumers, being homeowners typically, left in the lurch in the event that there's a failure. So we're conscious of the need not to have a leaky building scenario, and to make sure we've got those consumer protection elements along the way.
Part of the sales pitch as well has been that this is streamlining the process, because the old process has been around for a while and it gets added to as these things do, and it is time for a refresh of the system. That streamlining of the process is something that makes a lot of sense. Our technology's changed, our methodologies have changed a lot. The materials that we're using, for example, have changed. We have more sustainable materials. But there's always a concern when you are streamlining something to make a process like this faster, when you're dealing with an industry that has such a high injury and fatality rate, that might be something that slips through the cracks as well. How do you go about ensuring that you can make things fast and safe for the people who are at the end of the hammer?
Yeah, look, I mean, a really good question. And again, that's obviously an entirely legitimate concern or question to raise. I think not only the materials and the techniques are advanced technologically compared with what they used to, but I also think some of the ways that we think about how we build have evolved in a way that moves definitely in the direction of worker safety. I think, for example, of off-site manufacturing, which is pretty much what it sounds like, and we're a long way from the old prefabs that people are probably familiar with from classrooms being plonked onto school fields, and frankly pretty poorly constructed and only ever intended as a temporary solution. Invariably left permanently, by the way, but that's another story for another day. But off-site manufacturing, which the government in its own procurement is moving towards, but also in the private sector, iwi and other community housing providers are understanding represents good value for money for them, actually is a great move in the direction of worker safety. They're not exposed to the elements when they're working off-site. They're not working at heights except in quite a controlled environment. They've got extra personnel around so that there's a safety number element that's possible, rather than one or two tradies being isolated out on site. And actually, even from a mental health perspective, to have people working under one roof literally together and being part of a team working progressively on a number of buildings at once, it seems to me inevitably will have benefits for the way that people work together as human beings, as well as being able to operate more productively from a business perspective and get the consent signed off all at once and so on.
Have you had much feedback from councils? Because obviously they're also very heavily involved in the process at the moment. And when it comes to things like land use and changes to the RMA that are coming up, they're going to be very, very interested to know what happens next. There's changes happening to local government law. There's local body elections this year. There's changes to RMA. There's a lot of stuff going on for councils. So have you had a chance to discuss this with councils, with local authorities, and the sort of feedback that they're giving you on everything?
Yeah, I have, and you're right. They're a key player in all of this for a number of different reasons. One is that they have a function of signing off, consents and so on. So they've got a lot at stake. They've got an important role, but they've also got a lot of risk. They're interested and involved as territorial authorities that then manage the built environment. They're rating authorities that obviously need to know that the value of properties for the purpose of raising the revenue to do the things that they need to do. So yes, they're a key player. I would say, and I hope and expect they would agree with me saying this, that I've interacted really diligently with local government, mayors, councillors, but also building control officers and other people who are planning and on the coalface really in the front line of these kinds of decisions. So I think changes that we've made, for example, in relation to the liability, reducing from that joint and several liability, as we call it, the full cost that could and does currently come down upon the heads of councils and therefore the ratepayers. The move from that to a more proportionate or fair or direct responsibility kind of regime reflects the fact that council officers have told me that they don't feel it's fair and right for them to have to be on the hook for poor building practices by professionals who should know better. And I agree with them. So, we've worked constructively together, and I think we can iron out any details in terms of the mechanics of what it should look like to conduct inspections remotely or within a certain period of time if we engage closely. So I've certainly made every effort to do that.
That remote inspection thing was something I wanted to ask you about as well. We're obviously changing technology. I work with a couple of large asset management companies overseas in the field of AI, and they use AI tools to do their job. I check to see how assets are working, what needs to be done, and the upkeep on that. Is there a mind of basically bringing in that kind of technology and making the legislative pathways possible for companies here to use that to make sure that the work's up to spec or on time, or to monitor staff and those kind of tools that AI seems to be promising to the field?
Yeah, I mean, there is, as you know, from your overseas experience and have just expressed, there's huge opportunity in this space. I'm really keen that as a sector, we allow builders and building professionals broadly. I use that term for shorthand, but design all the way through to all the trades involved, to make the most of the technology, because that will be good for them, and it will be good for those signing off the work if they've got access to be able to process applications and monitor it, and of course for the consumer if we can reduce some of the blockages in the system. But I think the key is not for me to sit in the beehive and think of a way that I can design or update the system to reflect the technology that exists in 2025, because sure enough, I'll be out of date, if not by the end of the year, by 2026 and beyond. So I think actually if you think about a system change that is more enabling of people to use innovative techniques, provided that they can be responsible for the end product and being agnostic about the way that they can ensure that they check that they do get a good quality and safety and sustainability outcome, then we should allow that. And to be honest, that's exactly it's one of the reasons that self-certification seems to me a really exciting opportunity, because we will be agnostic about the way that people get to result. As long as they can stand behind the quality of doing so, then we can afford to be less prescriptive in the building code and more enabling of the joys and the possibilities and the opportunity provided by technology such as AI, digital twinning, and even remote visual inspection, using technology for video conferencing such as we're using right now.
Is there going to be in this legislation then, if there is more of a focus on that self-certification and those self-moderation outputs, is there going to be more focus in there of if you fuck this up, you're going to be hit harder?
Yeah, that's exactly the phrase that's going to be in the legislation.
Perfect.
But if not those precise words, then very much that spirit. Yes, absolutely. That's the quid pro quo. We don't want people marking their own homework and getting away with something that they would otherwise not if there were a council officer standing over their shoulder with a metaphorical clipboard in their hand. So yes, frankly, that's it. And to be honest, not everyone will want to do that, will be able to do that. And when people say to me, well, Chris, some builders, some practitioners won't be able to get insurance, they won't be able to sign off their own work. My response is that's good. great. We don't want people who insurers or private entities aren't prepared to stand behind, wreaking havoc on the homes of the unknowing, vulnerable Kiwi consumer. I mean, why would we want that? And if anything, if we clean up the town with and drive a few cowboys onto the horizon, then that's a good thing, not a bad one. If anything, it's a feature, not a bug of the system that we're going to be more stringent for precisely that reason. That if you F it up, it'll be on you.
Okay, and final question before I hand back to Blake. I want to put a second story up. Do I need to send you the form, or who do I talk to about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're doing work that requires a building consent and it's not an exempt work, and then we need to consider whether you're able to do it or someone is qualified to do that work. Send it to your local council, being the building consent authority. All those things you've given me an opportunity to say. One of the things that we've listened to local government on and going to allow them to do is consolidate their functions across different council boundaries. So depending where you are and whether there are councils in the area that might share the resources with your local council and therefore get an easier ride to do the things they need to do, which ultimately will benefit you and your mate down the road who's also getting an extra story on his or her one, then that's going to be a good thing too. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to crowbar that in there, and good luck for the extension.
Fingers crossed. Blake, over to you.
So, but as we wrap this up, just a bit of quick fire, how are some of your other portfolios going? Because I understand that you cover more business, so that must be a difficult portfolio economically at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't quite catch the one specific one you referred to.
Small business.
Oh, yeah, indeed. Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, small business and construction have both been hit really hard by over the last few years, including in the time of our government, and for similar reasons. And in fact, in many cases, they are one and the same. So, yes, it's been a difficult time, but as with construction, there's every reason to believe that, later this year and certainly into next year and beyond, there'll be a better and happier place for small businesses to operate. So, we'll do everything we can to encourage and enable that. And of course, praise and give due recognition to those who have operated in a very resilient fashion in the meantime.
How are you helping Minister Collins in the defence area?
Yeah, I mean, I am the Associate Minister, and as you've quite rightly alluded to, Judith Collins is the Minister of Defence. I've got 4 different areas, or delegations as we call them. One is maritime fleet renewal, which is pretty much what it sounds like, namely, advising government, fellow ministers on some ships that our Navy should look to procure for the future. Another one is defence industry, again, self-explanatory. And then there's the base and infrastructure, along with some regulatory review, which is just checking that we've got the right settings in our law to enable our defence force to operate safely and appropriately.
And then we've got land and veterans, I believe. So how are those going?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, veterans is a bit of a natural tie-in with defence, and it's about making sure that our former sailors, soldiers and aviators are appropriately respected, recognised and receive services to which they're entitled. And then land information is a few different things, but it's a lot to do with the land that the Crown owns that's not conservation land. Sometimes it's being held or prepared for iwi settlements under treaty settlements and other ways that Crown can own land and lease it out to farmers in the South Island and lots of other different areas. But that's an interesting portfolio as well. And if I were to anticipate that you would ask me one more question in the space, it would be that I'm Associate Immigration Minister as well. So I get the opportunity to consider whether people who don't quite meet the criteria to be able to work or study or live in this country should nevertheless be allowed to do so as an exception to those circumstances.
Of course, how's all that going with the reason I get you to bring that up is how's that going with because there's been some controversies around disabled people and your side of the immigration. So how have you been dealing with such a sensitive area in a traumatic way?
Yeah, it's a challenging area. I mean, immigration is in general because there's so much at stake for the families and the lives of those who are affected by government decisions in this space. And of course, you have to weigh up the benefits and, dare I say it, the cost at an individual and a community level of any decisions. But of course, you also don't want to undermine the system as a whole. And while there isn't a formal precedent setting value of decisions in this space, as there would be in a court of law, nevertheless, I'm trying to operate on a fair scenario such that if you were to say, well, one person, wouldn't do any harm to allow them in, notwithstanding that they've been in New Zealand unlawfully, perhaps, for example, or don't meet the health requirements, and yes, that is, unfortunately, in some cases, an issue and a question that affects the disabled community. Nevertheless, if we think about having policies that would, or getting around policies or acting contrary to the intent of policies in a way that would open floodgates or put pressure on the system, or be unfair to those who are waiting patiently in a queue and not having the opportunity to have such discretion exercised in their favour, then that's a consideration that I've got to weigh as well. So I'm not going to pretend it's easy. My aim is to keep out of the courts and the papers on these decisions, but I'm not always successful.
Well, we greatly appreciate your time, Minister, and I know it's very busy with the debates going on at the moment in the House, so we do appreciate your time with us.
Well, I appreciate yours with me, and I'm just really enjoyed the chat, so thanks very much for the opportunity to do that, and if I may say, keep up the good work.
Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.